course, our man Andrew DiCecco. Andrew, good morning.
Well, I appreciate that. Good morning, guys. How are you?
We're doing great. So
Very great.
We're going to break down the draft with you and the players that were selected by the Eagles, but let's start off with what we were just talking about there. George Kittle gets the extension from the 49ers. Obviously, Dallas Goedert cannot get that amount of years and that amount of money with his injury history, but the Eagles did not end up selecting a tight end in the NFL draft, a position we all thought they would target. What do you make of the tight end situation for the Philadelphia Eagles, and have the chances of Dallas Goedert's return increased, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, to me, Andrew, one of the biggest winners to come out of that draft wasn't even a player who was drafted. It was Dallas Goedert. And the reason why I say that is because there's obviously not a lot of tight ends on the Eagles roster right now behind him that are going to challenge him for a starting spot or that have starting capabilities, in my opinion. So the closer we get towards OTAs and even training camp, it becomes more and more likely that they're going to try to find a way to work it out with Dallas Goedert. And really, they should try to find a way if they're able to meet halfway, because we've talked about it. Dallas Goedert means so much to that offense. Obviously, he's used drastically different than a George Kittle, but when his number's called, he's highly effective, and Jalen Hurts has a lot of trust in him, and he's the Eagles' best blocking tight end. So maybe for one more year, you're able to make it work, because he does make that offense all the more dynamic.
Why do you believe it's gotten to this point? Because I've heard some whispers that it's what Goddard's camp potentially doesn't want, because reportedly the Eagles have already discussed an offer with him, made an offer at one point, and it was, I guess, either rebuffed or it never got serious.
Yeah, I have to think, John, it has a lot to do with his availability. He just turned 30 years old, and he doesn't have that same production as you were just talking about as some of the upper echelon tight ends in the NFL. But sometimes numbers can be deceiving, and that's why I don't necessarily take stats always into consideration, because when you look at him on the field, he makes an impact. Every time he's on the field, he makes an impact. I would argue that two of his best games happen to be in the Super Bowl. In Super Bowl 57, we don't talk about that, but he was making sideline catches and being that security blanket for Jalen Hurts. So he does a lot of things well, but I just think the rest of the league is probably a little bit hesitant to offer him a lot of money or really be in the mix to get him because of his availability history.
Let's focus on the first three players the Eagles selected with this question. Of course, Jahad Campbell, Andrew Makuba, and Ty Robinson. If you remember, I believe you were in studio for this conversation last week or 2 weeks ago. We discussed how we would evaluate some of the rookies in this upcoming season, because you all have these Super Bowl or bust expectations. Now that we know the players and we know the positions, one could be competing for a starting linebacking spot, one could be competing for a starting safety spot, and the other is going to be competing for a percentage of snaps to replace what they lost out of Milton Williams. How will you evaluate those three players? Because ultimately, they are going to have to make an impact if we're talking about getting back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, well, just based purely on that, Andrew, I think that Howie Roseman knocked this one out of the park, and I viewed all of those players highly in their respective positions, and I think Campbell's going to be an early impact player, whether that's rushing the quarterback off the edge or playing off-ball linebacker. He's a player who has a multifaceted skill set, and the Eagles are going to use him as such. That has Vic Fangio's name or seal of approval stamped all over it. Makuba was my favorite pick of the Eagles for draft weekend, because when I watch him, his ability to take the football away, but it's his ability to kind of play that mental game with quarterbacks. He's highly intelligent. He's good at manipulating quarterbacks, and he's versatile. So if you look at the history of Vic Fangio and his safeties, he tends to look for those smaller type of players that have that versatility. So I think that he's really going to – I do believe that he will be a starter. And then Ty Robinson's another good player that can fit into the rotation. He's a little bit undersized at 288 pounds, but he's going to work in that rotation with Jordan Davis and Moro Ojomo. So I think that based purely on those three players, you have to be really excited with what the Eagles did, because they're all going to help, in my opinion, immediately.
When you talked about the fact that it's like, it plays right into what Vic Fangio wants to do you see it more as a Vic Fangio pick or a Howie Roseman pick, going after a impact linebacker that can also be an edge?
Oh, I view that as a Vic Fangio pick, John, because I have to believe that was part of the agreement when Vic Fangio, came on board with the Philadelphia Eagles. I know what I'm looking for. I've run my system for a long period of time. I have certain qualities, certain traits, certain characteristics that I need to run my defense at a high level. And if you look at some of the players that they brought in and some of the foundational pieces there, they all seem to sort of jive with what Vic Fangio has historically looked for his defenses. And that Makuba pick in particular, I mean, that seems like that has his stamp of approval, because he doesn't. That's an underwhelming player for some because he's undersized. But we've talked a lot about him, you, me, and Andrew, on the program. I just saw him as a tailor-made player for that defense because he's so versatile and highly intelligent.
Last year for Inside the Birds, you did the rookie diary and you followed Will Shipley closely throughout the season. You had 7 other players that the Eagles selected outside of Campbell, Makuba, and Robinson. I'm not asking who the rookie diary will be, but which player are you most intrigued by to sort of follow their rookie season and see how they grow into NFL players?
It's a great question, Andrew. I would say Samel Mondin, the linebacker from Georgia, who was my linebacker 4 during the whole pre-draft process. This is a player who started for 3 years at Georgia, so that's nothing to kind of cast aside. That's an achievement. But he does have a lot of athleticism. He wasn't above playing on special teams. He has a blue-collar approach to him, and I like his toughness and leadership, which it kind of reminds me a little bit of Nakobe Dean. So I'm curious to see how quickly he's able to immerse himself in the defense and maybe be a factor as a rotational player and certainly a special teams maven. That might be the rookie diary candidate this year. You guys heard it first. But I would also say that Drew Kendall, the offensive lineman, the center/guard, is a really interesting selection because I liked him during the process. I reported that Jeff Stoutland had a Zoom meeting with him back in March, so there was some interest there. But the Eagles didn't have a backup center last year. They had to move Landon Dickerson from left guard to center mid-game whenever Cam Jurgens was nicked up. And now Drew Kendall gives you that guard versatility as well. So he has some athleticism, and I really am curious to see how Jeff Stoutland molds him.
Is there anything that happened in the 3 days of the draft that fascinated you because you were like, wow, that was a bit of a curveball that I didn't expect them to do?
Just not really, John. I would say probably trading down for one. And when they traded down in the 4th round, to me, it was because in my opinion, it was because there's an offensive tackle there from Iowa State who they really liked, who they hosted on a 30 visit, and he got taken by the Colts. Then they sort of dropped down. But as a whole, not really. They did kind of what I expected on day 3, take those flyers. They added a couple of intriguing tackles, offensive tackles, one of which Cameron Williams has a lot of athleticism, but he's really raw, and that is the quintessential Jeff Stoutland project. So he's going to be enrolled in Stoutland University. I'm curious to see if they're able to kind of find a diamond in the rough there. But no, nothing out of the ordinary. I thought that the Eagles did a really solid job on draft weekend.
Just kind of tie a bow on the Dallas Goedert conversation for now, because we're obviously still waiting to see what happens. If he's not back, what do you believe is the backup plan for the Philadelphia Eagles? Because I think the original plan was drafting a tight end, and that clearly didn't happen.
Yeah, so let's just operate under the assumption that he's not back in this scenario. Then, I mean, I don't view Harrison Bryant or Kylan Granson as starting tight ends, nor do I view Grant Calcaterra as a tight end who can start the full slate of games. So by that logic, the trade market would be the most practical to try and upgrade that position in the interim, and that would be Michael Mayer, perhaps from the Raiders. If you look at what the Bears did, adding Colston Loveland in the draft at pick number 10, maybe a guy like a Cole Kmet, unless they're going to suddenly run a whole lot of 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends. Maybe he might be available, or Luke Musgrave, because the Green Bay Packers have 2 tight ends, and Tyler Kraft as well, or Taylor Kraft. So, yeah, I mean, they might have to explore the trade market.
All right, not to put you on the spot, last question. Jordan Davis, by tomorrow, will they or won't they exercise the 5th-year option?
I'm going to say no.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, but you're going to say no. I also am going to say no.
Yeah,
that's where I'm leaning.
Quote me. I don't like to do percentages.
No, I got you.
I'm going to say no.
All right. Andrew, listen, man, you're doing a great job as always. We appreciate it as always. We'll be bugging you again later on down the week, and just keep up the great work, man.
Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
There is our Andrew DiCecco.
Thank you so much for checking out our content on the 97.5 The Fanatic YouTube channel. Hope you enjoyed the video. And remember, you can always be checking the playlist. There may be something you missed from one of our shows during the day that you want to go back and check out. So every time you like a video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and you'll have that great content coming to you every single day. You're greatly appreciated.